Welcome, everybody, to another Maxwell podcast. And this is Maxwell in the Multiverse, where we explore interesting aspects of eminent personalities in the legal space. And today we are privileged, honored to have with us Sapna Jhangiani KC, who she specializes in international arbitration and litigation. She's called to both the English bar and the Singapore bar. She's practiced in a few places in London, in New York, in Dubai, and then she's been practicing in Singapore since 2011 with an international firm. And she's also worked with our Attorney General's chambers, and she sits as an arbitrator and a mediator. So welcome, Sapna.
Thank you, June. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And as you know, we are not going to be talking so much about your law career, but an interesting other career that you considered at some point in your life. And I understand is journalism, being in the news. So tell us a bit more about this. I mean, when did you start getting interested in it, and why did you eventually not go in that direction?
Well, firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to imagine what my life may have been like if I'd actually gone into one of my potential careers, which was journalism. So from a very young age, I've always been very curious, interested in many different things. I've also been a very strong communicator, and journalism was really quite a natural career choice for me, but I was also very interested in a career in the law. I can't think of one particular point of time at which I was inspired to go into journalism. I think I was very interested in TV news. I was very interested in CNN when that was started. I think that was in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the 90s. But I chose to go into the law, but actually the area of law that I chose to go into was journalism law. So I specialized in media law.
Right.
There was one leading set of barristers' chambers that specialized in media law. I worked hard and did what I thought was all the right things to enter that field. So I did work experience at Channel 4, British news channel.
Oh, right.
I did work experience at the Mirror. I did work experience at Channel 5. I did a lot of work experience in the legal departments of these news channels and newspapers, and ultimately was successful in gaining a pupillage and then a tenancy in media law at this leading set of chambers. And I specialized in defamation and privacy. I worked very closely with the media. So I would spend one night a week being the duty lawyer for the Daily Mail. A very challenging job, I can tell you, because if you felt that something they were about to publish was going to be a problem from a libel point of view, you had to have a discussion with the journalist and say, I think you might want to reconsider this. Do you have evidence for this? So I did that once a week, and I also did the Saturday Mail.
So wait, so when someone says this looks problematic, run it by legal, they're basically saying send it to Sapna. Is that what happens?
I read the whole paper. You read the whole paper from cover to cover, and you give a view whether any of the stories which have not been previously cleared by the in-house legal department may be an issue, because of course there are many last-minute stories that come in versus 24 hours.
Right.
So that was a great experience.
So
I spent a lot of my time working on the news floor and sitting among journalists. I also was a duty lawyer for the Mirror. It's a great experience, very formative. And my day job was actually assisting on legal cases. So one of the first cases I was involved in involved the BBC. I acted in a team of barristers for Elite Model Agency, who sued the BBC over a documentary series that they said defamed them. And we had to look at all the footage from the documentary series, the footage from which it was cut, to see whether we could argue that they had selectively edited it. It's all very interesting.
But so you're still doing law work within the media and journalism space. Did you at any point in that journey, like sort of imagine, but I'd like to be on the other side of the desk. I'd like to be the one, interviewing people on the street and writing the story and presenting it in the evening in front of the camera. Did you ever feel that way?
Many times, almost every day.
Okay. So in a way, this was kind of your way of trying to still marry the two passions, that law and then still have a foot in like media and stuff. But at any point, did you ever feel like, besides the fact that from a law point of view as a career, you were doing really well, but did you ever have a thought that, would it be more fun? Quite apart from, what you could earn and, your career prospects, but would it be just more fun to be on the reporter side of things?
It's funny, it's just while talking to you now that I've just remembered that I think when I was in my second year of practice, and I did really enjoy my legal practice and still very much do enjoy my legal practice, but because I had this other desire to go into journalism, I think in my second year of practice, I wrote to Sky News to see if I could have some work experience for a week. So for a week, I took a week off work from Chambers and I shadowed a local London news journalist around London.
Wow.
As she presented her stories. And I think at the end of that week, I thought, I'm not sure that this career is for me. Because what's really interesting and what I think you don't realize when you're a consumer of the news is that it looks very polished, the story is very well put together, and it's made digestible and it's packaged in the best format possible. You don't see all the work that goes into that, the number of takes that they do,
right,
how unglamorous it is,
right,
schlepping around the suburbs of London for different stories, trying to find sources. And I think that I had a very different impression of what the job as a local journalist actually involved, because I think had got the impression that it would be different from what I saw as the packaged news. But I think the behind the scenes reality, as in all professional fields, is actually very different. And I thought at that stage of my career, I didn't think that I preferred that to my day job.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's such a great peek into the reality of the difference between what we see as the end product and how you got there. I've had my own experience when we were trying to, be interviewed for various things, and they'll say, "Stop! Someone just walked across the frame. Let's do that again, like from the top." And you're like, oh, that was a really long answer. I can't even remember it. So I can imagine that it's not as fun as it appears, because we see the final product and we didn't realize that it took like 10 takes and half an hour, and by the 10, and people are looking a little bit worn out and a bit tired of it all. So that's an interesting aspect of it, which I think we don't really consider, because, and it can happen, as you say, to anything. Like a movie, you watch the final movie and you're like, wow, but then you see people on the set for hours waiting to be called because they're filming some other scene right now, and you're in full makeup and you can't use the washroom and you're just sitting there, stuff like that.
I think it's the same across all professions. If I think about my current profession as an advocate, you see the finished product, you see the oral argument, you see the written submission. But one of my favorite analogies for advocacy is that actually the advocate is like a swan, appearing polished before the tribunal or the court, but actually under the water, their feet are paddling furiously. And there is so much work going on behind the scenes. There is so much work behind the scenes for a written submission. But actually, in advocacy, what you see is the finished product, and it's very different from all the work that has gone into it.
Right. But I guess that's one key difference, is that you don't get a second take as an advocate. You don't get to tell the judge, sorry, I screwed up my submission. Can I start from the top again? And the judge will be like, no.
I suppose it's only an appeal. By then it might be a bit too late.
Yeah, whereas, for a news crew, if the situation permits, it's not like a tornado that just passed or something, you could say, I think let's try the shot again, maybe even a different angle, where the lighting is better, whatever, right? So you do have a bit of margin for error in journalism that you might not have as an advocate.
You're absolutely right. I think you have to be very, very prepared and minimize your margins of error.
Are there anything that you think, a journalist, the kind of experience and the kind of skills that a journalist needs, are the kind of things that an advocate needs, that you found it kind of was similar in both worlds that you were involved in, that lawyers also need to know this or to do this, besides just communication? Any other things you think similar to journalism?
I think other than communication skills, I think as a journalist, you've got to assess and weigh up your evidence and your sources. And I think you've got to do that certainly as an arbitrator, you've got to weigh up your evidence and your sources before drawing conclusions. I think that's very similar. It's not too dissimilar from advocacy either, because you have to have carefully weighed up and assessed all the different items of evidence, and you've got to have a very strong awareness of both sides of the argument and the evidence for and against you. So I think that skill as a journalist certainly is something that you can use as a lawyer. I think another really important skill as a journalist is storytelling.
Right.
And they've done a lot of research on this with experiments with the human brain. But stories are a significant tool of persuasion. They have proved this, and they've looked at the development of the human brain and the fact that the part of our brain that processes images actually developed long before our ability to process text, for example, and words. And given that stories are a tool of persuasion, I think the ability of journalists to tell stories, and they tell stories usually through sources, through people. I think storytelling is a key skill as an advocate. And so I think it's something that transfers across well. And I think it's important always to bear in mind the human aspect of any case that you're arguing for, because at the end of the day, tribunals are human, at least most of them are. And if you can draw out the human aspect, the storytelling aspect, you've got a greater chance of engaging your tribunal. Make sure they're listening to you. They can't find for you if they're not listening to you.
Right.
And you think you've got a greater chance of persuading them.
No, that's fantastic. I love the fact that because when you talk about journalism and reporting, people always immediately associate that with stories, right? It's like a news story. So that kind of really makes sense for people. But they don't always think of the role of an advocate as a person who also is trying to tell a story, which is the story of your client's case. And how you tell the story can actually really influence the tribunal, because it can be a poorly told story. You might actually have a strong case, but the advocate didn't really do it justice with the story. And the reverse could be true, where this case isn't as strong as the other person's case, but the way the advocate presented it, it really highlighted the strengths of the case. And the tribunal was like, yeah, that actually, I never thought of that. That's interesting. But then we also move into this place where we have the word spin.
Yes.
And that's a problem. I think most people associate spin, at least as the recipient of it. I mean, if you're a marketing department of a company, spin is what you do. But I think if you are watching the news or you're listening to an advocate, and you have a sense that there's a lot of spin in there, which is basically someone trying to frame something in a way that it's not really misrepresentation, but it kind of makes it look a little different from what it really is. And I don't know whether there's some undertone where people are uncomfortable with that. It's almost like, are you not letting me see the unvarnished truth? Are you trying to, make it look like it's not, which is, I guess, it's an element, a thread of almost like dishonesty that could be woven to that kind of issue. So what's your view on this, both for journalism and for advocates?
Well, as advocates, we have a primary duty not to mislead a tribunal. So I think we need to be very careful about staying faithful to facts. But the reality is that when you are looking at storytelling, we're not talking about making up facts to tell your story. We're asking ourselves questions like, whose eyes do we present this story through the lens of? when does a story start? For any story, there are details you will want to highlight and include, and there are details that you will want to leave out. And so you can still present your story and be faithful to the facts whilst presenting it in a persuasive fashion.
Sure.
One of the areas I teach at the moment is storytelling skills. And I present the same version of facts from opposing points of view. And the underlying facts are exactly the same.
Right.
And when I teach storytelling, I ask those attending to read the two different sets of facts and think about how do they feel when they read the two different sets of facts.
Right.
It's a scenario involving a 15-year-old girl who's accused of a crime. And in the first version of facts, she's presented as a criminal. And the second version of facts, you see things from her point of view. When she committed the alleged crime of theft, she hadn't slept all night, she hadn't eaten for 2 days. And so the same set of facts, by choosing different details, different points of view, it's always possible to present the story from a certain point of view and persuade and stay faithful to the facts. And I think the same skill of presenting your story in a way that allows the story through whose lens you're presenting the story to make sure that they are heard, but also staying faithful to the facts. I think you also can do that as a journalist, and it's important to be very faithful to the facts as a journalist as well.
But here's the difference, you see, because in advocacy, you are representing your client, one side, in an adversarial process. It's by design an adversarial process. News is not meant to be that sort, I think. At least the traditional idea has always been, the romantic notion that you're just here to report the truth to people. But we now know, especially in a very polarized world, that you have news sort of media outlets that are aligned with particular political sort of spectrums, like whether you're a far left, far right news organization. And of course, at the end of the day, it's still a business. You're still trying to sell newspapers or clicks or eyeballs, whatever, right? So how does that, again, come into the idea that has it tainted, or has it always been part of the business that everyone knows and no one wants to talk about, that we're not as objective as we would like to portray ourselves to be, because we do have certain ways of looking at things and interpreting the facts on the ground and presenting it to people through our lens for whatever reason. And as well as we know, there's some owners of media corporations who again are of certain political persuasion, and they use their power as owners of news organizations to try to push particular narratives. And what are your thoughts on stuff like that?
These are very interesting questions, and you're absolutely right. I think that we live in a very polarized world. And I think that the notion of objective journalism is not the same as it used to be. I think there are certain news organizations that very clearly have a particular theme or a particular point of view, and they will be selective in what they put forward. But if you think about it, even media organizations that do their very best to be in the middle and to invite their viewers to form conclusions rather than necessarily passing the conclusions on to their viewers, there is necessarily some selectivity in what you show your viewers in order to enable them to draw conclusions. So I think it's difficult to form hard and fast rules here when the very act of being selective in what you present will lead to certain conclusions, most likely on the side of your viewers.
Well, this has been amazing and a lot of fun, but I just want to end off with, as I typically do, a slightly more personal question. So if there was one individual in the world of journalism and news that you would love to be able to work with for an extended period of time, who would that be?
without a doubt, 𝘔𝘶𝘹𝘸𝘭𝘭 from CNN.
And is there a time period, like when she was reporting on the Gulf War or whatever, something that you were inspired by and said, I would love to be there working with her? I mean,
I've watched and admired her career from afar for quite some time now. So I certainly admired her when she was a war correspondent. I enjoy the current program that she puts out. In particular, she has the opportunity to interview very senior people, including heads of state. Mm-hmm. And what I like about her is the fact that she always gets right to the heart of the issue.
Right.
She will immediately zone in on what a determinative point is. Mm-hmm. She will ask difficult questions, and she will not let those who she interviews get away with not answering. So there's certainly the ability to be incisive, mm-hmm. but also bravery.
Right.
Bravery not to shy away from the difficult issues, the difficult questions, and bravery, of course, to go into war zones, mm-hmm. To put herself right in the center of the action, even though I'm sure that there was risk to life,
yes.
as there always
yes.
is for war correspondents.
Yes.
We see again and again, unfortunately, the tragedy of war correspondents not making it out of the war alive. So there are many qualities that I admire in 𝘔𝘶𝘹𝘸𝘭𝘭. I would love the opportunity to work with her at some point in my career, which is not over yet.
Have you met her actually ever?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, we'll make sure that this podcast gets to her somehow. But thank you so much, Sapna. This has been lovely, a lot of fun, and we really appreciate you giving us your time today. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, June.